have the experts on the panel here. So please, any questions? Yes.
All right, thank you. I was just wondering what you as a panel think about how most newly designed areas with a sustainable perspective normally create a gentrification process in the area that around them. Should we as urban designers somehow try to plan sustainable areas for not only people with a lot of wealth and high income?
Anybody will jump into that?
Yes. No, just want to say yes.
I'm sure, of course, like a district in Irasema that I was talking about. I'm sure if more people will just be around, and more people will also come, because eyes to eyes makes everybody more safe. So, I mean, in a dangerous area like that today won't be as dangerous in the future if there's more public places.
So we were at a conference earlier this summer in Stockholm, and I think there was general agreement if cities were to make more space available for these flex experiments, where you could do urban agriculture, or you could do, what did you say, cycled up housing, and you made available ways of greening this or turning it into an internal economy. One of the strategies that they have is, you know, to maybe sell the methane or whatever, that you try to use the provision of space with the ability to get some money and some kind of entrepreneurial motivation with a little seed money. I think we could actually create these kinds of things in ways that would really be bottom up and really help people trying to enter into the economy. So I don't know how to do that. I haven't done it. If I had another life, I think I'd like to try to do that in various places, because I do think thinking of waste as a resource is a way to create another kind of an economy. And if you read any of the stuff about India or Africa and the informal settlements, there already is an economy like this. I just don't know how it works, and I don't know how cities can help it succeed in a positive way. But I think it's a rich opportunity.
Thomas, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just also wanted to mention the informal settlements. We do some work with Urban Think Tank from Venezuela and Zurich on informal settlements. I think there's actually a lot we can learn, and it's a little bit the tragedy of our profession that the more successful we are, the more we create gentrification. So do we really want to make bad design in order to avoid gentrification? So it's a little bit a kind of a chicken and egg thing. And I think there is something we should learn from informal settlements, that in our formal world that we allow for a certain amount of informal development. I think that could help. Even encourage it. Or yeah, encouraging, yeah.
I think a big part of it is what we noticed in Amsterdam. There are a lot of these initiatives coming up, and a lot of people drawn to it are like hipster 20 people. And these are people that are already engaged with sustainability, and they find it awesome, and they meet each other, and you get these islands of people that already think a lot about the environment, but the bigger part of Amsterdam, and maybe the poorer part, is being left out of it. And I think it's about the starting point. As soon as you go and talk to those people, what would you need? What would you want? And you take that as a starting point, and then you start to build something with which they are involved, then you get a whole different story. And there's an example of this in Berlin. I think it's called Märchenpark. And it was completely built together with all the poorer people that already live there. And you see a really different development where the poorer people feel included instead of excluded.
I think, too, there's a little bit of a challenge with the word gentrification. I think we need to start being more careful about what is inherent in that word and what it starts to suggest about the way we think about race and equity. I had a conversation just the other day about this and about understanding actually the flaw with that word in general as we think about design. But I too think that it is at a level about engagement and presencing ourselves as designers in different communities within the cities we're working, finding different ways of engaging, and not just the kind of typical public meeting format that we're used to, but how do you really become part of a community for a while in a totally different way, and what that solicits about the conversation and about the potential for very specific programs and types of spaces in different communities.
I think it's about pervasiveness as well. I think part of the challenge that you're speaking to is because some of these initiatives, or many of these initiatives, are novel. But as the ability to do this kind of green development, particularly related to public spaces or publicly accessible spaces, becomes much more common, then it won't be such a kind of targeted set of benefits. So I think that really it's a question of how do we scale up the efforts so that it is not so isolated.
One challenge that we really haven't talked about much today is there's a lot of sense around, particularly vegetation and green solutions, that they are a win-win, that they have all these environmental performance benefits, and they absolutely do, and they're very significant benefits. But we also need to be aware of that they're not always welcome in communities. If you look, particularly in the U.S. and U.S. cities, there's a pretty strong correlation between income and tree canopy. And some of that is because in neighborhoods you're not investing in the tree canopy in lower income neighborhoods. But it's also a case of not wanting the tree canopy because of the vulnerabilities it creates, that you are underinsured on your property, tree branch falls on your property, tree falls on your house. Those are real concerns. And so as we're working with cities to get them to increase tree canopy and other vegetative cover, it's not always welcome. And that we shouldn't underestimate that as one of the challenges to actually implementing these strategies.
So I have a question over here. My question is regarding the issue of interdisciplinarity, which we use that term all the time, and education, and the link between these two things. Because on stage right now we have people with a range of backgrounds, and every problem we're talking about has to do with several different types of disciplines coming together to solve really large, complex problems. So I guess my question to you as educators and practitioners is, are we educating the next generation to solve the complexity of these problems, and what could we do to improve this process, to create people that are better at solving these kinds of problems?
Well, I think what Harrison ended with about the idea or the observation that it's time to move from modeling to experimentation is really important. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. And we're seeing that. We've seen a lot of presentations today, excellent presentations on design scale or project scale, experimentation, some at a larger level, but really getting to the neighborhood scale, and having a consistent approach to development. It sounds like in Toronto, Cindy, you can educate me, but the green tier, it sounds like a green area ratio, so it's a minimum green cover. Those getting that into the DNA of development is really critical. But in addition to experimenting with new designs and approaches as you get into the workforce, we need to also get into this habit of monitoring performance. So it's not just enough to put the trees in, the cool materials, changing the morphology of the built environment. We need to be monitoring because it's easy and it's cheap to do, and it tells us exactly how we're performing. So it's not just a matter of setting that as a goal, but we need to be measuring. And I think we're starting to do that, at least in my school, a bit more. In my campus, we're actually treating the campus like a laboratory and measuring things. But I'm not sure that's really in the state of practice, and I hope that will increase.
I think I can speak obviously mostly about professional practice, but I think most of the projects that were shared today are very clearly collaborations between planners, urban designers, architects, sustainability experts, engineers, landscape architects, and really that's the power. That's where you get success. So, the Humbertown project that I spoke about has an extensive design team. So, 2 architects, a very cutting-edge landscape architect. All of this was only possible because everybody thought about things cohesively, together, pushing each other to do better. To think a little bit outside of comfort zones, so that I think in the professional fields, I do believe that this is really happening. And I think education has the intention, absolutely. Like all of the campuses that we work on speak about the importance of interdisciplinary education and practice. This program seems to be very focused on a conference like today. Obviously, is very much about pulling in across disciplines. So certainly, I think that it feels like it's happening.
So I think we should ask Joey. And the reason why I think that is when I was sitting in the chair, I was so impressed with how they were able to dig up the right people to get involved and who had just the right amount of knowledge. And I would say it's your generation that knows how to search the web, look for people, dig into a question beyond certainly what I was able to do when I was your age. And I just encourage you to do that, to really dig into it. These folks worked their butts off to find people to help them when they had a question. So tell us, Joey, how the hell did you do it?
Okay. Thank you for this. I think it really is twofold. One of the ways that seemed to work for me and for Toon as well is the way our study is set up. It is an interdisciplinary study, so you get a lot of subjects ranging from chemistry to physics to like economics to anthropology, and you get a sense of what is there, and after that you start to focus on your bachelor, on your major. And this is already being done in the States, but I think it's a trend. More and more studies in Holland are going to approach it this way. So this is a good way to get in touch with the fabric of different disciplines. And I would say after studies in the real world, what we have noticed is if you make people stakeholder, you will get a lot back. So for instance, with the setting up of the cafe, the architect that actually designed it, he is still part of running the cafe. So instead of getting a lot of money and then designing something, he gets now money out of the revenue that the cafe makes. And in this way, you keep an architect who normally does something and then lets it loose and then goes on another project, actively involved, and all the knowledge will be contained in the process, and you get a lot of more ongoing expertise, I think.
I think that it's really important that when you're studying, you also are able to do one-to-one tests. So what Christer said, that yes, we should do more project in Sweden or in Malmö that actually is temporary, because I think actually that's what they've been doing in Amsterdam, that you actually are doing it all yourself. Because sometimes it's like it could be too theoretical, and what you learn in school, to do it in the practice, that's where you really learn it, because learning by doing. So one-to-one scale is really important. That could be involvement in public meetings, or it could be growing a tree, or it could be set up a cafe. But then to have this interdisciplinary issue, it's always welcoming, but I don't think you can force people to do it. So if you can start to play with somebody, it's much more fun. So I think that's maybe the really best about internet, because then you can search for people that want to do the same things that you want to do, and I think the key issue is really ownership. If you have an ownership, you will take care of it, and maybe then, if it's the right word is gentrification or it's something different, I think over time the same people can keep. I mean, 10 years is a really long time span to actually keep the area. So is it okay that a couple of projects are temporary and then they go over to something different? So I think one-to-one scale is really a key issue.
Just really quickly, I think the other thing that's important about temporary, as we were talking at lunch, is that it lets you break rules, because you're not breaking them forever, at least in people's minds. So the concept of a pilot as a test, as a way to get around regulations that if you're doing something officially forever, which is harder, I think is another very important way to cross the hurdle of can we try something new, can we be brave? I think somebody earlier said that really we have to push ourselves, and that's one of the things that temporary work seems to be able to do.
And I think just another really quick addition, this answer to this question is a big one, I think, but as an adjunct at the University of Minnesota, there are a couple studios, one in particular that is combining landscape architects and architects, which is the only in the sequence where they will overlap and team up to do one project at the end. And the discussion of whether there should be engineers or other people from the university that can come into those teams and for how long and in what kind of, is it a workshop, is it a studio? Part of being in school that's great is you can focus on yourself and how to get your own dreams somewhere. But you don't necessarily always learn how to have the discussion across fields, to feel comfortable asking questions of others, to get what you need. So I think those discussions in academia could be stronger and better. And I think that's on the forefront of a lot of universities, how to do that better. So for you all, it's better than it certainly was for me. So that's good.
Hello. I was wondering, so I live in Atlanta where, and I have the privilege of working with people who have brilliant ideas, but because we live in Atlanta, we rarely get to see any of these ideas come to fruition. So those of you who have been able to actually accomplish so many great just programs and just brilliant ideas, what would you suggest to people who may want to work in a country like United States or other countries that are not as open to new projects? How do you get local leadership and local businesses to buy in and let you design in this way?
I mean, there is a history of universities trying to develop what might be described as do tanks rather than think tanks, where they try to bring ideas into the community with the community. And there are some great successes and there are some not such great successes. I think it has to do with, I'm sure the success of what we saw today was Esme, right? So a coalescing personality with a certain amount of charisma and drive, working on an idea is pretty essential. There are a lot of places that are trying to produce alternative practices. We've had discussions at other conferences where you see, I know of an urban lab in LA that's pioneered with lots of cool ideas that eventually get done. I've seen the same thing in Chicago. I think one of the classics is the Auburn Rural Studio. There are lots and lots of models of places that have really tried to pursue this. Berkeley had lots of these in the 60s. It looks like they're coming back.
Yeah, well, even today, with the park lot,
yeah.
Phenomenon that started in Berkeley, they've taken it from this idea of the parking day and the parklets, to master planning strategies, which is what you guys are doing sort of in Amsterdam, that could be phase one of a way to solve problems at a master plan at a much bigger scale, potentially. So this idea of the pilot project that we sort of answered the last question with, I think is applicable here. In Times Square, too, it was this, let's temporarily close down Broadway from 42nd to 47th and study it. How are crashes reduced, traffic speed improved, how's the revenue of these storefronts increasing? And that is a ton of information that you have that you can prove. There's, prove to the government and to the community, this is better. Let's do this permanently.
That's Jan Gehl's success and all the traffic stuff. Is that what you were referencing?
Yes.
No, Snøhetta's work in
Snøhetta's
Times Square.
done
Yeah,
the same
but
thing.
it was Jan Gehl was there prior to that, but they have been working on it for 20 years before it actually happened. Thomas.
Short-term development. No, I think that, let's say generally speaking, there is this saying, why is the grass over greens always greener? Overseas always greener. I don't think there's any difference between the United States and Europe. If you look to Paris, if you look to these places which really have problems, Berlin, Frankfurt, nothing happens. So it's not any different. But I think there are these pilot projects and there are these seeds, and everything we are doing here is just acupuncture on the need there is, and we have to get much faster. And that's a little bit my struggle with these pilot projects, because like I'm living in a district which got built in the 60s. Now the trees are really beautiful. So it took us 40 years to have them being in a way that they have a real contribution. And I fear we do not have so much time. So I think we need to develop much faster with a lack of information. And it's here not different than the United States. And if we look at Southeast Asia, where real urbanization happens, if we look at Africa, Nigeria, where real urbanization happens, they don't even care. So I think there's a lot to do and a lot of work. And we have to have those projects. And I think that's the beauty, no matter how big they are, like the Amsterdam project as well as bigger projects. I think it's always about the understanding of how can we create better environments for people so that there is a desire for people to live there. And this is something we can show with these projects and hopefully create a movement. And I think this is our obligation, basically.
I think, of course, we need the bottom up, but we actually do from the other way around, because it's truly political. If the politicians decide, so let's get the new policy from Christer to see how actually Sweden can keep on going and really have some big thoughts. And then it's not small pilot projects. It's totally different. Yeah. So it has to be the politicians that decide. So I encourage you actually to see on YouTube the President Obama speech in Alaska, because it's pretty amazing. We know that's his last part of his term, but still it's really important that such an important person dare to say that. And he also speaks about that. This is the US. We have to actually, acknowledge what we're doing. And we're also say that together with China, have also recognized it. So it has to come from both ways. The ownership on the local base is of course really important, but it's really tiny, small things. So I think the political, and the same thing that the project we've been doing in Snøhetta with Powerhouse, because we suddenly get into a research state or project, then also the developers, so that, okay, I mean, everything, the pilot house costs 21% more than a regular house they would build. Another project we've been doing is redoing an existing office building. It's all more than 20%, but they say they get so much feedback. People also then will pay more in rent because they feel more comfortable to move in a place that they say this is actually taken care of, trying to do something with the future. So we have to get up to a different mindset. And I think it's starting, but we have to have really a big workforce. And that's why I think all the students here should really be part of that workforce to drive, because I also really believe that we can change the world with architecture.
Yeah, I agree, and I think also there is also light at the end of the tunnel, because just want to mention that we got involved in the development of design guidelines for the redesign of 5,000 streets in Moscow. So it's Moscow hired consultants to think about design guidelines for 5,000 streets in Moscow. And I think this is what we
should have
need.
these people. You should do a studio with these folks.
Yeah. I'm not allowed to talk about it at this point, so keep it secret.
It's broadcasted right now.
So, if you want inspiration, I'm not a Catholic, but I read the encyclical. And how many of you have read the encyclical? Oh, that's because I guess we're from a Reformation part of the world, aren't we? You should read it. It is a brilliant piece of literature. It really, really is. It's as inspirational as Obama's speech. And it's as inspirational in our responsibility to the planet as it is to our responsibility to the less well-off folks in the world. And I mean, this is someone who's devoted his life to this, and he's written in ways that I think would inspire you in terms of your responsibility. I think we need it at both levels. We need pilots. We need big plans. We need to go after the politicians. We need to do all of those things if we want to make a difference. And maybe I'm sharing Thomas's concern. We don't have a lot of time. It's really urgent. And that's what's so poetic about the Pope. He is incredibly urgent in this appeal. So read it. It's worth it.
I want to get back to your question for one last time, I think. Because we talked about the speed of the pilot influencing the bigger projects. And actually next door to the Keuvel, there is a project being set up, which is difficult to pronounce for non-Dutch people, Schoon Schip. And they were struggling for years and years and years, already 6 years, to get the permits right. And now the Keuvel has set off, and actually the local government has decided, and this is another difficult word, to make a regelluwe zone. A zone with less rules. So the entire area that neighborhood will be built in is less constrained now because of what those architects did at the Keuvel, and that is within the time span of 3 years already. So it can happen really quickly. And the second thing is, again, if you want to get projects off the ground, I think in the end you're doing those projects for the people that live there. So if you have their support, it would be really difficult for a government to say no, because they represent the people. So if you have the people on your side, it should not be a big problem, I think.
I can just say that at the municipality where I work, we do some culture planning, it's called, where we invite people to come and just pick out the places that they really like, or maybe places that they don't like, and so that in that way it's like a bottom-up thing. People comes with great ideas, and then also hopefully there's some politics there who also can see that what actually the inhabitants who actually live there, what they want. And I guess some of us in here will work at the municipalities, and so there's a lot of chances for us to invite for these meetings, which is important.
So do we have another question, Konstantin? Yep.
Yes, sorry. I was wondering, many of you have touched upon exploring and experimenting in design to better understand landscapes and cities. So I was wondering how we can better act to empirically research landscapes and cities by design, and also if there's any particular limit to where design can be sort of trusted as a research method.
I'll just speak again to the point I was making earlier. I mean, every intersection in Manhattan has a camera on it, usually multiple cameras. We have sensorized the city for various things. We've not sensorized the city to measure its environmental performance, and it's not that expensive to do. And we need to increasingly be doing it because there's still the perception that, you know, gray infrastructure, engineered infrastructure works, and green infrastructure makes us feel good, but it doesn't work. And so it's not until we're actually directly measuring these things that we can state with confidence that it works. And so with every project we work on, we include a component that requires monitoring, or we cover the monitoring when we leave. And I hope that will be increasingly more of what we're doing in this type of work.
I think the other thing to monitoring is culture. I mean, I've heard a lot of, the best designed buildings don't always perform the way they're designed to perform because their occupants don't fully understand how they're supposed to live within them and operate the systems. So I think that there's a benefit not just to ongoing monitoring, but also to ongoing training and access to information. And the other thing that I think it helps to do is build advocates, as Joey was talking about, and that people really understand what's possible and can then actually talk about it in a bigger circle. So.
I think Maura should speak to your question.
I mean, I've been thinking about the question, and I'm wondering if we aren't to some extent already doing this, that we're taking risks and we're putting out projects that we don't know necessarily the outcome. I mean, for us starting a small office, it's questioning, how do we get these projects? How do we get people's trust to do work that challenges, that experiments, that explores some of the potentials? What is our platform to be able to discuss and test some of these things? I can't say I have the answer because I want to do more of this. I don't know that the answer is in temporary. I think it's just in getting trust to do more faster. I don't have the answer. It's a big question for us as well.
Don't we need more people like Maura asking those questions and trying to produce the answers or at least test some of the hypotheses? I don't think they're answers. I think you can test the hypotheses that'll lead to another idea. But I think we should be doing a lot more of that.
Do competitions, maybe? More competitions, more soliciting ideas, but then you have to balance that with getting paid somehow, too. So maybe we need to have other people ask more questions that we can answer in quick, exciting ways along the side. Have research be a stronger percentage or proportion of our practices, everyone. And we commit ourselves to thinking. There's some kind of academia practice hybrid, maybe, where we're allowed to think and develop an experiment alongside getting paid to do practical work.
Or partner with people that can provide you with access to that skill set and doesn't need to take you away from your work as directly.
Yeah, so maybe we're just doing it all wrong. The whole model needs to shift.
Hi. I was just wondering from a global perspective, since we're talking about sustainability, this has all been about sustainability on a city level within the richest part of the world. Do you think it's important for us to keep in mind that we're also setting examples for the less rich part of the world? And can we, because that is, what I know, where the most new urban areas are going to be built in the coming 40 years of time. So maybe on a global scale, the most important thing for us to do is to change their perspective on how they will build those cities. Do you guys think that's something we should keep in mind when we design in our projects?
Okay, I say something. Yeah, I think that's important. I think most of the questions you ask, we could always answer with yes. But indeed, I think what happened is that starting with the modernism, post-war, 60s, 70s, 80s, we got this kind of international style, which is completely independent of climate. And I don't think that we need to go back. I'm not this kind of person who think the truth is we can find somewhere in the past. No, I think we should do a next step and get this climate let's say, climate-driven design or climate-responsive design, and this local design that has to do with the people, that has to do with the climate, that has to do with the place, to get this back into the design. And if we can show that this creates a better quality than the former universal design, then we can succeed. But I think we have to prove it has to become desirable. So we have to prove it, and I think that's, again, I think that's our responsibility, and that's the importance of what we do here. We could always say it doesn't matter globally what we do here, and if we look at the numbers only, it's absolutely right, it doesn't matter what we do here. But if we think about the knowledge we can create, having the wealth and the background we developed over the past centuries, then it starts to create a completely different level of responsibility with the design we are doing here. And I think, of course, we have to bear this in mind with everything we are doing. Everything we are doing has to be aspirational. That's what I think.
So just to jump on that for a second, I'd like to think that we could leapfrog to some much more humane, more desirable, and more sustainable solutions in the emerging economies. But don't kid yourself, there are incredible political and economic inertia in those places and tremendous corruption that needs to be overcome. But don't give up on that. I think in India, China, the US, and Europe, let me speak for the US, we have such a huge backlog of deferred maintenance in so many areas. There's going to be a vast investment. And we can't repeat the old models, because that then condemns us to another 50 to 100 years as a consequence. So I think we have a pretty short window to make big changes, and I think it's even more critical in China, because their whole economic development is a real estate development model, and the current one is, it has succeeded in creating probably the greatest wealth in the history of the world, maybe in the wrong percentile of people, but it's also really bankrupted the environment, and I personally think it's a real time bomb. And I think the China stuff that we've done here in SUDes has tried to point to other ways of operating, and hopefully, I think China, because of the health problems they've created for themselves, have a real motivation to change. But I also think they have a short window. Every time they build one of those, 100 megawatt power plants, that's online for the next 50 years. So it's a real time bomb.
Okay, I think we have a question. Yes, please.
Going back a little bit to the beginning, where Cindy spoke about streetcars in Toronto. Right now there has been a lot of debate here in Lund, because they're thinking how to about tackling the amount of people that will commute between the central station in Lund and the Max 4 lab, etc. All these people have to get there in some way, and they're discussing building rails for streetcars. But a lot of people have been very positive because it costs a lot, and some people have tried to come up with alternatives, like why not just use electrical buses, or I know in San Francisco I saw they both have streetcars and buses that don't require rails but are still driven electrically. So basically my question from this issue is, how do you balance how do you balance the change you make with the costs, both economically but also further down the chain? When you do a big project like streetcars, there's a huge carbon footprint, because you have to do the rails and all the materials, etc.?
I'm not a transit expert, but I think that it is a very big debate, and actually Toronto is very focused in what is the right answer. We have historic streetcar routes, so that's easy. The rails are in place. They've been in place for probably 100 years, and so it's a kind of question of just continuing to invest in those. The discussion now is whether future surface transit should be light rail or whether it should be flexible buses. And I think that it comes back to capacity. For the most part, rail-based transit is got higher capacity to move more people, so the cost may be longer to return, but it actually makes more sense in terms of its ability to serve the need. There are a lot of challenges, though, with incorporating contemporary rail into the street fabric that we've created, and that's another design challenge, something that we have often struggled with because the focus on the new systems are trying to get higher speed, moving people. In many ways, they're being conceived of as in exchange for below-grade transit for subways, because subways are so extraordinarily expensive. But what that puts pressure on is the desire to move people over long distances really quickly on the surface through the urban fabric and not to stop very often. So they're losing the benefit of being able to serve both local populations on shorter trips in favor of longer distances. And also a lot more barrier that's required because the trains are moving faster on the streets. So the safety of having them actually operate in a pedestrian realm is harder. So they're really real questions. It's not clear in terms of what the easy way forward is for future decisions in terms of light rail.
I also don't have an answer because I'm also not a traffic designer, but I know that someone at TU Munich made a PhD on embodied energy that is going into infrastructure. And I think this is important that no matter what kind of infrastructure on public transportation it is, even tunnels and subway, the embodied energy going into it is negligible compared to all other alternatives.
Negligible?
Negligible, yeah. It's much lower than all other alternatives over time. Mm-hmm. So that's not an argument against public transportation.
Okay, we have 2 more questions here.
Hey. I just want to go back to the previous question. The European and US architects and urban designers often design in China or Asia or in the whole world. Do you think it's important to take into consideration the differences between the nations and how Asians or South Americans perceive public space, different types of housing, etc., etc.? Or can we just move like our perception of good urban areas and move it to other parts of the world? Thanks.
I think that's a question that's, conversely to the others, I think that's a question that, for me anyway, is easy to say no to. I think that Thomas talked about the international style, the sort of generic kind of approach to design, not respecting local climate or local culture, I think is a recipe for failure over the long term. I think that the success is bringing best practices from the kinds of experiences that have been shared here today, but really taking the time to understand how people use space, how they value space, how it contributes to the unique pattern of their lives and the climate in which they operate in. And so I think that the practice of doing what we do is a continual learning experience, very situation specific, getting the benefit of a lot of thinking that comes from lots of other places, but making sure that it is modified and customized for the context that you're working within.
Yeah, I would say that actually, as a designer, doing deep research into each of the places you're working, about culture, about dimensions of the built form, about all sorts of things, builds your capacity to be able to design more sensitively here back at home too. So being open to understanding others and how they move and how comfortable they are with, one way you could think about it is how, how much space you're used to in each culture. How close you are with other people and how you move and how flows happen. And I think that just changes the way you think about a section in an urban environment, from the US to Sweden to China to lots of different places. And by being open and sensitive to others and the way that they move will change your design solutions, and you will learn from that. So I would also say no to that question.
I'd like to say I think it's really complicated. And the reason is so much of the built environment is built by developers. So they're producing a market product. And so many times in China, if you did what Maura just said, you'd get fired because they want to buy, you know, the hottest, latest, hippest housing product, because they're selling urbanism inside a gated community as a product, not as a living experience. So I think all of you are going to face that kind of complicated situation, and I just warn you about it, because you'll get had pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, I've worked on projects in China, and you know, the client has wanted, you know, a certain expertise from our experience as American designers, but that didn't stop us from doing deep research into how, you know, they live and what they do in their public spaces differently from ours. So that, and maybe that was a decision we made to try to understand and adapt, you know, an intuitive approach that is familiar to us in a different cultural setting.
Okay, Duncan, do you want to say something?
Well, I noticed you said say instead of a question, and that was appropriate. I just wanted to observe what I think is the challenge for all of us here who are interested in education or are being in the process of education. Several times there was reference to how important it was to be able to think out of the box, or to think out of the comfort zone, for people to move out of their comfort zone. It seemed to me we can think about the challenge really as having all those coming to enter the profession, including ourselves already there, to have an expanded understanding of what our comfort zone is. To have a comfort zone which is extended by very personal observation and by also measurement. And to move and be able to see and move and then work with other people who are able to see and move in different ways than have often been the norm for what gets done in education, architecture education, engineering education, anywhere. But to try to have expanded comfort zones for everybody for their work. Yeah.
Maybe we are coming to the end of the day. Oh, there's another question. Good.
Hi. It was also a question coming from Asia. I see a lot of questions related to the developing world. I just wanted to say that looking at Scandinavian design or American design, I also see that there's this move towards social engagement. And then in Asia, you see that is a given. You always have social engagement. They do all the houses on the boards, they do it everywhere. But there's a lack of regulation. And that's where the corruption comes in. And so I think it's also learning from each other, also a bit to see how the models of social engagement work there. I was working in Dharavi, the biggest slum in Mumbai. Very good people, very clean spaces. It's a totally different stigma attached to these spaces as well, purely for developmental reasons. So, like, I totally agree with Maura's argument that you actually observe more and you can learn and then develop something new. So yeah, I think something I like also is the process that was that I mean, I'm an alumni from SUDes, so I like the process that you learn, and that's something you can export to different places where the process is allowing people to volunteer and engage and come up with something new, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting to the end of it. And I think it's been an extremely inspiring day today. We had a lot of really good lecturers, so I give them first a hand. But even more important, it's actually that there's so many here today that had been listening, been discussing, so now you just can keep on, have a flow in the discussions. And I think to take some of all of these discussions today and try to get them into your project, and it's always site-specific, and it's always yourself that decide how the next step will be. So hope that you remember to work together. Now you know you can be interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary or work together with the whole school, and you have to go out to ask people the questions, and you should actually maybe start to occupy an area in Lund and make our own cafe. I think that would be really good. So I hope you take all of this new, really good energy, the inside rain and the outside the nice sun. And I wish you all really good luck with the semester. And I hope to see you all next year. So thanks a lot for today.